Hey everyone, this is Steve Good and welcome back to the podcast. Returning, of course, as normal is my co-podcaster, Yuri Cataldo. And joining us today, the lovely Tina Fotherby from Famous Publicity, based out in the UK. Tina, welcome to the program. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. It's my pleasure. It's lovely to meet you both again.
And Yuri, I would say it's lovely to see you, but, you know, it is.
I know where I stand. Don't you worry. But it's good to be here again, Steve.
I'm not worried. I know you're coming back every week anyway.
You can't get rid of me. I've been sticking around for a while.
So before we jump into all about Tina and Famous Publicity, have you guys been following the news at all this week in terms of all the madness? Of course, crypto is down quite a lot. You know, about a week and a half ago, Ether was at 800. Now it's down to, it just hit a few minutes ago, 450, which was a little bit scary because it's like a 50% down in 2 weeks, which is not very pleasant. So have you guys been following any of that in terms of the news and what's happening?
A little bit, but I have to say I'm going to sound like a Neanderthal. But when I see this going up and going down, I think, well, that's what you expect, isn't it? It's volatile. It gives people something to write about. It gives those critics something to complain about. So
absolutely
think,
true. Yeah,
you know, it's interesting because in many ways, let's just say that what amazes me is how much copy is written about things that we know are going to change, and perhaps the challenge is for people to find better stories to write about crypto.
Okay, so interesting you said about things that are going to change. I'll tell you something that hasn't changed.
What's that?
Bitcoin is still trending more positively than Beyonce. And that is in the news this week, in fact. So
yes.
I appreciate that sentiment, Tina, and for that I had to throw that in.
That's lovely. And how wonderful is Beyonce? So yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, she's probably not very happy that, you know, Bitcoin is trending more than she is.
Yes.
Anyway, so why don't you tell us, well, Yuri, you want to ask a question, don't you? You have your weekly questions that you want to throw in, don't you?
I do, my usual weekly questions. So we'll start with Tina on this one. So Tina, have you tried to spend any Bitcoin this week or just in general?
Yes, and there is a friend whose office is just a few doors away from mine, and he's a young guy who works for an IT firm, and he mines cryptos. And basically, I needed help. So I'm sounding desperate here. I had an old laptop with some very valuable photographs on it that needed to be moved. And basically, he hacked into my old laptop, pulled it apart, and found the files. And I rewarded him with Bitcoin, and he was thrilled to bits. Now, he's a young guy. He's about 22 and really understands the whole crypto area. His problem is actually having enough money to get hold of cryptos. But he was thrilled to bits. And I have to say that...
thrilled to Bitcoins, you mean?
Thrilled to Bitcoins. Good one. I love it. Thrilled to bits. I can't believe I said that. And
couldn't have scripted that one.
No, exactly. And I have to say that my take on it is that Bitcoin is the grandmaster cryptocurrency. Yes, it's criticized. We're told that the transaction levels are slow, etc. But I'm really, really proud to have the relatively small amount of Bitcoin that I have. I'm really pleased to have it because actually it's relatively difficult to get hold of, I think. And I do love the whole story behind Bitcoin. I'm sorry, I buy into it. I think it's fantastic. And all of the highs and the lows, we know what happened with exchanges and people losing funds. All of that just adds to the mystique to me. And
right.
I love it. I love the thought of having an asset that's volatile, but also I think very valuable. And, the value is beyond the rate that's quoted. I just feel really thrilled. I should say I am the most useless late adopter on cryptos. I've got friends who bought in very early days, and it was just off the radar for me, completely off the radar. I think I was a bit preoccupied with other things, but once the penny, excuse the pun, penny dropped, and once you get into the whole
once the Satoshi dropped, we just going to have to keep,
that's right. The Satoshi.
Our language is going to change. In a few years, we're going to be talking about, the Bitcoin dropping and the Satoshi dropping and whatever else. It's going to be a whole new language,
And what I love the design, the logo design. I like the story. I like the name. I like the bit element. And if I'm not totally honest, it pains me to ever use Bitcoin. I just want to hang on to it. I want to hang on to it for 10, 20 years and give it to my kids and say, when you took the mickey out of me and saying I was mad, well, there's that, assuming I might still be around. But that's it. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. I think if you're into cryptos, then you've got to love your Bitcoin. Really. That's my take on it. I've read up on the subject, and I love all of the, whenever, you get the same old stories coming about the amount of Bitcoin associated with money laundering and all kinds of crimes. I just think it's just another reason to say, hang on to it.
Yeah, in fact, there was something I saw in the news that there's a proposed bill in the U.S. Congress that would commission the study of crypto in sex trafficking, interestingly enough. So that just came out in the news this week as well. So, it's been a really, not to change the subject, but it's been an interesting week because you mentioned about hacking, and there was the Korean exchange that got hacked over the weekend, which is what people thought was what triggered the whole sell-off we're experiencing. But then, of course, you've moved us very nicely to the fact that there's other things to consider, like holding versus being part of sex trafficking, child pornography, money laundering, and all the other, gun selling, and there's a lot of other, but all that weird stuff has always gone on regardless, and people have always found creative ways to do it, and crypto is just another way of looking to do it. I have heard that the FBI, for example, they've admitted themselves they can't find a way to legitimately track transactions going through private coins, but I guess they're going to do some things I've heard about, trying to access certain key data or transaction data that you'll be required to hold it and share it in case you get subpoenaed. So there are some changes coming there. This is just some early information I've heard from some analysts in the industry. It's not come out publicly in the news yet, but it's on the way. There's some stuff going on there, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on with this space in terms of money movement and not tracking, although actually tracking it's not as hard as everyone thinks. As long as you know the source and destination, all the ones in the middle are just people moving it from place to place. It's not hard to follow.
Exactly. And I perhaps it's a little bit outrageous to suggest it, but it does seem to be that there's sort of, it's very easy to have anti-PR going on about cryptos. So for example, if you think of who ultimately is going to lose out, when cryptos, basically take over from fiat, who loses out? And it's got to be in their interests to, really try and downgrade and rubbish. Almost, it's what gets to me is the sentiment. So they're attacking the sentiment. Yeah. So actually trying to make you feel a bad person because you have Bitcoin. But actually, do you know what's really weird? All these crimes have been going on since the Roman times and since people had coins.
Yeah.
And what about filthy lucre? Let's focus on that. So it's very interesting because I really feel as though it is astonishing how, to be very simplistic, so I'm exaggerating just to make the point, but an awful lot of mainstream media is really anti-cryptocurrency per se. They really are anti, and I think it's attached to the old world. It's the advertisers, the established insurance. If you look at insurance companies and their influence over our lives, they're in massive influence, which nobody really fesses up to. But so much of the news is associated with insurance companies.
Oh, yeah, of course. And protecting your existing business, and either you adapt or you die, right?
Exactly.
And I think more people tend to take the approach of not invented here. I'll just poo-poo it and I'll be negative about it in public because surely no one's going to buy into it. And usually those are the ones that get left behind and they become obsoleted because they chose not to engage and they said, I'm not going to even investigate it. And this is a classic, mega shift in who's going to be around in business and who's not. I mean, Amazon hasn't, held back in buying URLs. Facebook has only openly admitted they're testing out blockchain. Telegram is now, done an ICO for blockchain.
Yes.
The FBI owns Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Publicly they have said they own about 2%. So, those organizations, whether they're governmental or public, they're not going to go away because they're going to find ways to innovate and use it. And if other companies decide not to engage in crypto, blockchain, and the technology behind it, surely they're going to end up falling behind and they're going to make themselves obsoleted for not staying relevant.
Mm-hmm. I would also say that there's possibly, obviously there is no evidence except for the sentiment that I'm hearing,
Mm-hmm.
but I would say that there is a dual campaign which is slated as much as possible to the general public.
Yep.
And obviously use the media to do it, whilst banking and collecting as much as you can at the lowest possible price.
Well, the interesting thing about, I don't disagree with that. I think what I think is interesting is because I speak to a couple of fund managers as well who have, direct access to what's going on in the futures markets. And they're very openly saying to me that a lot of the trading that's going on is unfortunately, bigger money moving Bitcoin around based on futures contracts. And of course, nobody wants to lose money on their contracts. So they're all making sure that they, slap each other on the back and they make it. It's not directly what they're saying. It's how I'm interpreting it because I like to be a little bit controversial about the realities of all this. And, great, give you guys all a slap on the back, but don't mess up the rest of us by intentionally pushing a coin a certain direction and then back up again because you've got another contract going the other way. But you know what? That won't go on for very long either because regulatory won't put up with it. So, the thing is, if they start to spot variances in this, it'll get caught out very quickly, and they'll just, they'll make a few scapegoats out of a few people, and then the rest of us will fortunately see the benefits of that by being able to say, great, now the manipulation's probably minimized and we're back to sort of normal working again.
Absolutely.
Because there's been other stories. There's a story today, in fact, that was on the Cointelegraph about how there's some speculation, and it is speculation that USD Tether and Bitfinex, who are Bitfinex, the exchange, USD Tether is the coin that's apparently tied to the USD. They're both owned by the same parent company called iTether. And there's been some speculation that those two companies collaborated together for the point of manipulating Bitcoin to the height that it reached last year in 2017. Yes. But again, it's speculated. It's not substantiated, but it's just people, as you say, in the media looking for things good, bad, and ugly, because it's easier to bring out bad news. And some of that media is manipulated. Some of it is just spun because people don't like what's going on and they're losing control. But fortunately, some of the news is positive and good too. So we like to grab onto those.
Absolutely. And I think actually the other thing is that there's so many good things going on in terms of the ICO space. The funding's still coming through very strongly. I don't know if you read it, but there's a fantastic report that ICO Bench do. They do a weekly report that's free.
Really?
Yeah, it's really, really great. And you just go to their website, put in your email address, and you can download this comprehensive report. It's weekly, over 22 pages long. And in May, 1 week of May, the week ending June 4th, starting May 28th, there were 50 ICOs completed, 50, which is phenomenal. And actually, look, they've calculated the revenue coming through the time period, and basically, May was a really big bumper month for revenue through ICOs, and also interestingly, I'll just tell you what it came up with. So there are 129 ICOs in May, and the revenue generated was 1.023 billion. And March, they had 122 ICOs, which was 1.726 billion.
Wow.
Now, the great thing is an awful lot of those monies raised are for startups, for innovators, for really good people doing good work.
Did they give any indication of how many ICOs did not make it? Because I think that's awesome.
Yeah,
I think that's a more because I've seen just a huge number of ICOs drop off, not For very obvious reasons.
Yes.
One, they were expecting free money. Two, they said they had budget, they didn't. Three,
Yes.
they just didn't have the right money spent on the right things, and they ended up just blowing it. Four, they weren't talking to syndicates, going to events, talking to whales, talking to VCs or private money. And one thing I have seen is there's a bit of a mega shift I've also seen over the last 6 months, which is crowdfunding was huge in 2017. And in 2018, I've seen it to be very, very thin on the ground.
Yeah.
And more people just kind of waiting than participating. And there's been a much bigger shift toward, larger scales of money, whether it's whales, syndicates, VCs, hedge funds, fund managers, private investors. But, we're not talking about the $500 investors. We're talking the 25,000 to 5 million, 10 million investors. So in that context, the number of ICOs you're saying passed sounds rather small when you think of the thousands that are out there going. And I can certainly point to about 8 or 9 that I know of just off the top of my head that didn't make it between about February and March.
Yeah.
So there's probably a huge number that just aren't showing on there. So that's even more interesting.
Yeah, well, what's great is that the people at ICO Bench are really receptive to feedback, and I will share that feedback with them. And they want to improve the reports, and I think they could look at that. As you know, the one caveat is it's quite difficult to measure the lack of something, if that makes sense. So when people drop off the radar, that can be quite difficult to spot.
Well, if they don't finish their ICO and raise the funds, then it's pretty easy to track it.
Yeah. So it is interesting. So
just moving on a little bit to talking about you and your company, because obviously you want to do some shameless plugging while you're here, I guess. Who doesn't? So tell us a little bit about Famous Publicity, and actually, how did you get into PR to begin with and end up in ICO PR world? Because that's
good question.
I'd love to just understand how you've ended up in this space.
Okay, thank you. So a bit about me. Before I set up Famous Publicity, I worked for a guy called Theo Paphitis, who was on Dragon's Den. Shark Tank in the States is the equivalent program. So in the UK, it's called Dragon's Den. And he's a retail entrepreneur with 3 big brands to his name. He's also invested in property, and he's got a sports background as well in football industry. So I worked with him for 4 years, which was brilliant. And it was very much like dog years. I was actually there for 28 years, believe it or not. But seriously, it was what happened in a week is what I'd done. I used to turn down in a week what I'd want to achieve in a year in other roles. It's just crazy because it was just a role of managing all the exciting incoming inquiries. But obviously he's very busy, couldn't deal with them all. So we were turning things down all over the place. But it was a real privileged role. And I was there with somebody who was on TV and well known, and I had a fantastic time in that role, but it wasn't really the real world. Truth be known, if you hang out with anybody who's really well known, if you're with them, you go into an event and you're treated like a VIP. If you go to the same event without them, you're just a nobody. So it's actually hilarious. It's so funny. And what's funny is if you go somewhere and they think you're a nobody, and then they discover, oh yes, well actually you're with, and it's all very funny. But that's another story. The reason for saying all that is actually the real world is one of graft and business. But what was fascinating about that is that I learnt about business models. Yep. Because I would sit in meetings when Theo would have somebody come in and pitch to him with a proposition wanting investment, and he would always look at the model. And I had no idea what business models were until that point, and that was a real privilege because if he couldn't see where the money was coming from, it was never going to work. Mm-hmm. And that was fundamental. But also he's also a good guy and believes that it's about the people. And if you have the right people with a weaker proposition, if they can execute it, you'll get better results than somebody with a fantastic proposition, but they're, not necessarily the sort of people to follow through.
Yep.
So that was that was a sort of life-changing episode for me. And prior to that, I had worked in PR for 30 years. I started off working for a women's magazine with a manual typewriter, and a union that basically said on my first day of joining the business, because it was the print union, you might have heard about this in history books, but basically I couldn't be sacked, and I could, it was a job for life sort of thing. I worked as a secretary to the consumer editor on a weekly women's magazine, and they were concerned because the circulation was only about 10 million and it was about 20 million, a few years before. And needless to say, the magazine market, as we all know, all print is really in massive decline, which is unfortunate because I'm a great believer in the need of good journalism. So what was interesting is I started off there and being on the receiving end of press releases and media information. And that was, I'm showing my age here, but it was 1979 when every lunch there was a big, wonderful press conference with celebrities on every day of the week you could go to. Great fun, and no internet, no mobile phones, the whole thing. As I said, in my case, not even an electric typewriter. So actually, you're probably not surprised to hear. I did confess to being a bit of a Luddite, and now you know why. But I did type with more than 2 fingers. But actually, moving on, I really love PR and communication, because actually, jokes apart, I do think the media have a very important role to play, because they are asking the questions that bodies, governments don't want asked. They have an extremely valuable role in informing people and giving people information. And because the media has changed so much, and to me, a good career is one where you're learning, then actually that's the best thing about working in PR, because you have to keep up and you have to be on it. You have to learn new technology. Otherwise, you're dead. Quite frankly, if I'd had the same mindset that I'd had when I first started work, I'd have no job at all. And right. The same way PR, what happened is that everyone said, oh, media relations is dead because, it's all social media. And I never actually believed that. So I'm really pleased, because my view is that actually it's too easy to go down the social media route. You can all earn an income from it, but you're not never going to really excel or make a difference to people big time, because it's a commoditized sector. And yes, you can have social media whizzes, but let's face it, social media is, it was the emperor's new clothes, for 10 years in the PR industry. My view, I've always stuck to the mainstream media relations, to the national and regional news channels, worked with news agencies, and that's the really exciting area. So what's happened is
you're talking about the kind of the PR space of getting news coverage, media coverage, being written yes. up in the press, that kind of thing.
Exactly right. So it's mainstream national newspaper coverage
right.
for anything from services, products, people. And basically what's happened is then people brought in automated, terrible software, in my opinion, that automates responses, and I hate it. So that's the Luddite in me has saved me, because we always approach journalists one-to-one. We have a good pitch, we know what they want, and we deliver copy that they can use. And GDPR is fine for us because we never ever did mass mailings. We don't spam people. So of course, actually what's happening is that I'm really pleased that we've stuck to it, because now with a combination of global databases for media contacts, our own contacts, global media monitoring, which I wanted 20 years ago, and I was quoted such silly money, I couldn't possibly afford it, but now it's affordable. And
wow.
That is the great thing. So seriously, if you want, so 20 years ago, I wanted to, and I think it was actually pretty much a paper document based, but I wanted a database of international media contacts, and I was quoted £25,000. And
wow.
Now you can buy that if you negotiate well, and you've been using the service for a long time, you can get it for about 5,000.
Really?
Yeah.
So the price has gone down by 80%, despite the
and it's
economy going up over time. Yeah.
It's more robust. But the thing is with these services is they're very good, and that we use agility, which is very good. But basically they have, You have to buy it on subscription. You know, they won't let you just come in and nick all the contacts. And they've also brought in new tools, which are quite good. So you could say, for example, search geographically for people who've talked about cryptocurrency in the last 2 days, and it'll pull up every media contact they've found who's talked about it. So that's very useful. And just to say, I'll give you a demo if you ever want one. So yeah, and I'll share that. So the tools are getting better. And then in terms of the results, there's big data companies. So Meltwater News is a brilliant company, and they are very good at drawing, you know, people used to use Google Alerts for monitoring the media, and it's just hopeless. So they can source results anywhere in the world, including China, which is really important if you've got work there. And you buy the service, and it's a set rate. So you get this unlimited number of results, which is very sensible, because in the old days you used to pay 200 quid for paper cuttings, which were terrible. But also there's another service we use called Yellow News, who is owned by Kantar, part of the WPP group. And basically it's the service used by all of the big political parties, all of the government departments, and it provides print and digital results globally.
Interesting.
And they present it to you and will say how much the value of the coverage is as well, if you want to know, should you have bought it in advertising, which is a bit of a moot point, as you know. But so the tools are there, and you know, again, these services are good value. Actually, they're expensive, but they're good value. Because
sorry, I was just going to just ask a question about the whole kind of PR space. Have you noticed any impact or shift that's taken place because of all the social influencers that are out there now covering, for example, in the crypto space, you get coverage of crypto projects and you get multiple views of a video on a particular project rather than a single article from a single, you know, news channel that gets read and then forgotten. Have you seen any kind of impact that might have in terms of how it affects your business or enhances your business?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because what's happened is basically, and this is possibly why I'm so open to cryptocurrency, because if you look at what's happened to the media space, it's decimated. And that is a massive change. And if that change is happening so rapidly, so quickly, then you know the opposite can happen in a good way.
Yes, absolutely.
So basically, as you know, the issue of the last 10 years has been media fragmentation. So there was a time when you could, I mean, with the exception of the advertising in the middle of the Super Bowl, you know, there isn't a great deal that you can say.
With the clothing malfunctions and other,
Yes, exactly. Wasn't that funny? I love that. So cool. I can't arrange that this afternoon, I'm afraid. I haven't got
It's okay, we weren't asking. It's okay.
I wish. But anyway, but yeah, you're absolutely right. So there's complete fragmentation. And what I really like about this fundraising space and the crypto space is that there are entrepreneurs out there who are making a bit of a living out of commenting on the sector. So obviously you're looking at the YouTube influencers. Good for them. I say great stuff. You know, some of them are smashing it. I love the fact that some of them are anonymous in disguise. That just makes it even more comical. But seriously, these people have got a really good following, and video. This is the other complete truth of life. People respond to video in a more emotional way and trust it more than any other medium. Full stop.
Yeah.
Except maybe face to face.
Well, of course, you know, there's a reason for that in part because the way we learn, you know,
exactly.
And Yuri, right. Well, so I mean, 70% of human beings tend to be gravitating toward visual forms of learning, and video is the easiest way for learning. And I've always found it so funny because, you know, conference calls are a nightmare for work because I'm having to sit there and listen to figure out what's going on. And I'm not saying I'm not a good listener, but I don't learn very well from having to listen to things. I like to see people and talk to them, and then I can visualize in my head what we're talking about. And that goes to the second part of learning, which is about 25% of the world only learns from auditory. So, you know, if you think about it, you know, maybe people were forced into reading because that's really what they had as an option to them. And maybe now the diversification of video to written content is actually more of a representation of how the human mind and brain really works. So the video actually is there because that's what people actually want to learn. It's easier for them to learn and to gravitate to something they understand. And those who are still reading are doing it because that's what they're more comfortable doing. And we're actually just self-selecting already. And we didn't have that option before. Now we've got the option to do it. And that might be a factor. I didn't mention the last 5% because they're a very hard group of people to target, but that's the, but Yuri, do you remember what they are?
Last 5%? I don't.
Yeah. Kinesthetic.
Kinesthetic, of course.
Right. The emotional types that are, you know, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So I see what you're saying means I'm a visual person. I hear what you're saying. I feel your point. I mean, that just tells you exactly. So you can tell quite quickly, you know, how someone likes to learn or be given information by how they speak. So
Absolutely.
You can take that away as and all of our listeners for that matter can take that away and use that on your colleagues and friends when they say, oh, I see your point. You go, you like videos more than you like reading books, huh?
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
So you've studied NLP.
Yuri and I both have, amongst other things.
Fantastic. Great. Yeah. I'm really into it big time.
Yeah.
And love it.
Yeah, so you didn't tell us how you actually got into crypto itself, though.
So how I got into crypto, like all good things in life, by sheer fluke and accident. And that was because a friend saw a tweet from David Siegel from 2030 Pillar Project saying, do you know anyone who can help with some PR who's good? She recommended me. I spoke to David, it would have been about 1.5 years ago now. He was coming to London to give some talks about blockchain, and he's got a talk which is about 1 hour long, which says, this talk is going to change your life. And basically it's talking about all of the big institutions, the big buildings in cities, all owned by banks, insurance companies, law firms, and how blockchain is going to change everything, how they've all been hacked, they've all had their issues, and how blockchain will change this.
And you're referring to David Siegel from Pillar, the project that's ranked around 130, 135 on CoinMarketCap.
Yeah, and what's great is we
fantastic.
had, and it is fantastic because they are, they've got fantastic vision. We worked on a multidisciplinary project, Zoom meetings every day, when we were obviously live in the run-up to being live, with people calling in from all areas of the globe. It was fantastic, and everyone's voice was heard, and I found that so exciting. To be fair, it was also high risk because we did the job knowing that we'd only get paid at the end if it was successful. And I have to be honest and say, I didn't even think that it would not be successful. I really didn't even factor that in.
And it does not mean that if people come to you now, they should expect pay at the end, because that's not what you're advertising and offering here.
Unfortunately, I'm not, because I've learned the hard way since. Yeah, I've learned the hard way, you know, as we all do. But it was fantastic. And to me, the really, really fantastic thing is blockchain and cryptocurrency. That's really exciting. ICOs, you know, the ICOs area space is almost like a fun fair. It's a bit of a sideshow in itself. It's almost like a substitute for crowdfunding. We all can see that regulation is going to come along and make things like bounties, as they are at the moment. Some of them will no doubt be illegal or certainly stamped upon, because from the in the marketing area, there are sort of questions being asked. So basically, it's a bit like, you know, we're playing the piano in the Last Chance Saloon at the moment. And, you know, some of us actually, I'd say the ICOs as we have them now, you know, there's already such a change. So for example, a year ago, you know, it's quite okay not to have KYC. You know, it's you're hard pushed to find an ICO that's not having KYC at the moment. You know, it's so difficult, because then how do you deal with your assets once you've got them? And the banks don't really like it. So I think it's fascinating that all of this is changing, but actually there's so much good going on as well.
Sure.
There's so much good. And
what would you say some of the, what are some of the best and some of the worst things you've sort of encountered in the world of the crypto projects you've worked with, and in whatever way you want to spell it out? Just a couple of quick highlights.
Sure. Okay. That's a good question. I would say the highlight, there there are a number of highlights actually, but possibly when we're working on Pillar, our remit was very much mainstream media, digital media, getting the message out there. And I think in David's super bright and is very good in terms of directing copy. And we just said, look, David, what we need is something really simple. Just give tips on how people should invest in cryptos. Let's just give 10 tips. And that got massive coverage. And one particular newspaper has actually virtually repeated the same copy about 4 times because nobody else is saying it's simple. People want simplicity in many cases.
Right. And too much of crypto is too complicated and too techy for the average person.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So you've done the same thing we've done, which is tried to, appeal to the masses to help people get started in crypto and make them aware of things rather than coming at all of it as talking nimble-wimbles and honeypots and people have, well, what was that? Yeah.
Exactly. And when you say to people, well, look, you've got assets, you might have property and you might have pension and various things in the, cryptos are very good. It's spreading your risk. It's good to be into crypto. So I think that simplicity is much needed. Now, thinking aloud, there probably is a real need for people within the crypto community to get together and do something proactive with the consumer. And I think some of the things, funny enough, Flashcoin is a good example. What they're doing is they're in a very good place doing good work. Yeah. And they're probably in a position to educate people about cryptos in general. And I'd say that's what's needed.
Yeah, because, absolutely.
For what we discussed at the start. But in terms of bad, to be totally honest, I know some really lovely people we work with. We work with some guys out of the States called Coin Locker Group for video influencing. They're fantastic. They're just brilliant. But there are some very aggressive agencies out there, very aggressive. And they seem to be based in the States. And I had a very unfortunate incident, which was so bad it was funny. But I was at home and it was late at night and I had a Skype message from a client to say, can you speak now? I said, well, okay. And I got on the call. And what I didn't realize was this other agency somebody from this other agency was on the call too.
Oh, how terrible.
And I had no idea, but basically the client was taking verbatim the point of view of the very expensive, ridiculously expensive, and quite frankly, not necessarily very efficient agency, and then poo-pooing anything coming from honest people, i.e. myself. And I ended up having this bizarre conversation where basically this agency said, well, there's no such thing as unpaid media anymore. Everything's sponsored. I just thought, what planet are they on? This is crazy.
That's terrible.
And it's just such a crazy thing.
So they were promoting basically paid for articles so that they could make their cut on the commission rather than doing legitimate press coverage. That's
exactly.
They got covered because they want to be covered, not because someone's paid for it.
Exactly. Right. And that whole area is very grey. So I feel for clients. Clients are vulnerable. There are a lot of clients in this ICO space where there are some very, very aggressive agencies out there who you just need to be careful, because how does they know? Certain people will gravitate towards the ones who've got 100 ICOs under their belt and think they know better, but actually they don't necessarily. And there are ways of these marketing agencies charging ridiculous sums. I mean, ridiculous. Literally, I'd say 4 times the usual market rate for work that's nothing spectacular. But of course, the difficulty is that some of the, let's just say that people raising funds can be vulnerable because they really don't know where to turn. And nobody wants to fess up to being on the receiving end of bad practice either. No. And this is the honest truth. Nobody wants to say, I've been scammed by a marketing agency. But that in itself, we all know, I can think of 20%, 30% of the people I've worked with have had scams of some kind. I mean, and they're
for ICOs really I've worked with, I've also encountered that there are certain, I'll call them marketing, websites that promise,
yes,
pay us $1 million and you're going to get X million, whatever's, and we're going to then put banner ads out for you and everything else.
of
And
course.
they're complete scams. You can see it because you get thousands of bots hitting your website when you're looking at Google Analytics. You can't find a banner for them anywhere. And you're asking yourself, what are we paying this money for? And I've seen one ICO very sadly spend their entire marketing budget on 3 of these companies that all had different services promised. Not one of them delivered anything. They'd spent their whole marketing budget. And then they came to me and said, is there anything you can do to help us figure out how to solve it? And I said, how much have you got? And they said, nothing. And I said, I'd go raise some more money and start again.
Right.
And I really did try to figure out how to help them, because it was just an honest, they called me up and said, look, you're out there, you're public, you've got a lot of things going on. Just give us some insights. And we spent a couple of times on calls, global calls with their whole team. And I basically said to them, don't give up. Just go back, dig deep, figure out how you can come up with some money, and let's figure out how to restart this thing, because what you guys have is a good idea. And it was a sad situation because they gave up. Some of the team members just said, oh, we're not going to go through it again. And there was, I think, one guy left who was a real believer in the whole thing still and said, I want to go ahead. And one guy who was kind of half in, half out, and the other 3 guys just bailed. And I said to the guy left, I said, you have such a good idea. You don't need those guys then. I'm sorry to say, if they're going to walk out because they're just disheartened by what's happened in the marketplace, it is sad. But don't let the scammers and the users of the world take away what you've got, which is better than what they had. Go for it.
Yeah.
But
right.
He never got back on his feet to it. In fact, I haven't been in touch with him for a while, so I don't know what he's up to. But I have to say to all of the people listening to what you're saying, Tina, and what we're saying, please, if you take one piece of advice, don't give up just because of some scammy stuff. In fact, don't sign up to things unless you check and validate them. If you don't know, check with us. We're all here. Yeah. We know what's right, what's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm sure, Tina, you wouldn't mind getting a few leads or a few calls out of it. Yuri and I certainly don't mind being contacted as well. So don't just go out there and sign up for things if you don't know what they are. Check first, because there is a lot of scammy stuff out there and a lot of dodgy agencies when it comes to all the press and marketing for ICOs.
Right.
Rant,
so, Tina,
rant finished.
Yes.
Right. In your experience, what are some red flags? So we talked about like what's good, what's bad. Like, are there some obvious red flags that people who are looking for marketing agencies who don't really know what to look for will go, nope, terrible.
Yeah, good. What a good question.
Yeah.
So from the top, I would say now with the space that we're in, a red flag is if the team and the team in particular, the core team and advisors, if they do not have any previous ICO fundraising experience. Why? Because it's a bit like being on an expedition. You have to be slightly nuts to do it.
Right.
Once you set off, you have got to have everything you need for that whole expedition, because from the start of the pre-sale right through to the end, you've got to have stamina. You've got to be really strong. It's very interesting. I completely agree with what you say about resilience. Mm-hmm. You need massive resilience.
Yeah.
And you need to be prepared to be almost, people in exhaustion mode because of all the testing, all the risks, all the scams, their sites being scammed and everything. People are in a state of shock at the end of an ICO, and that's when it's gone well. So you're right. You need people with the experience. Mm-hmm. I think that I think a good analogy is a bit like football. So we've got the World Cup, and, you don't need to like football to love the World Cup, surely. You've just got to love the fact that you've got some of these little guys who are beating the big guys. And, the matches, just the whole atmosphere. I love it. And I'm not a great fan of football, but I love the World Cup. Those teams that do well, they gel together. They've worked together as a team.
Right.
And yes, they might come from, because of the way football is, and you've got stars coming from all over the place geographically. It's those people who've gelled and worked together in a project well who succeed, because it's about the mental attitude. It doesn't matter, the mental attitude is key. So look at the teams who've worked together, and when you see teams that have worked together as a business and they've succeeded as a business, even if it's only for 1 or 2 years, They've turned something around, and then they're using the ICO as a mechanism for a blockchain-enabled practice. And there's a lovely one called Turnio, which I absolutely love. It's an ICO, which is fantastic. And basically, everything so good about these guys. They'd worked together in the ad industry. These guys, you must have them on your show, because they are getting rid of all of the overheads and wastage and scams within the advertising world.
Interesting.
Which actually takes us back to the media story, because one of the reasons why our media is suffering is because of Google and Facebook and advertising being ripped away from them, but also they're being ripped off because of so much wastage in the supply chain. And they identified, the guys at Turnio identified that the advertising industry has the biggest wastage in the supply chain for virtually any industry on the planet.
Wow.
And their solution is incredible. Anyway, and I don't work for them, I have to say. I just reviewed them on ICO Bench, and I thought, I love these people, and they're fantastic.
Have you spoken to them?
Yeah, I have. I've connected with on LinkedIn since I did my review, but they are epic. And one of the founders as well, on his LinkedIn profile is Daniel. He says that he went through a period when he lived in a car for a while, or he was homeless. And he fesses up to that, and he's got out, he's sorted himself out. And I thought, what a fantastic guy. What an inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who says that is public about it is someone worth looking out for, and when they're in the world of a startup, because they're not going to give up because they've just gotten themselves out of the car.
Completely right. Completely right. So red flag and the good things. So the red flag is if these people haven't worked at all together, they're disparate groups. A red flag for me is when you haven't got really strong technical resource.
Yes.
Because the technical side is what makes it work and makes it sing. And so, CTO is absolutely key. I think they're the most important, really, really, really very important. Then we talked about roadmaps. And as you said, I think the way I'm feeling is that the more simple the ICO, the better. In other words, the more simple the proposition, the better, because it's got a greater chance of achieving a result, and it means it's very, very focused. I think that's a point I'd say. Now, I'm just trying to think of what. I think what's interesting in terms of territories and the regions where people are from, I think the great thing is it's really purely down to, I don't see any, I would never say just because something's out of Singapore that it's a greater chance of success or anything like that. I think a red flag for me is when people keep talking up the price of the token and how it's going to increase in value.
Right.
And another red flag, and this is another Emperor's New Clothes thing, is if I don't understand the proposition, if I can read the white paper and not understand it, if I can look over it again and not understand it, then it's time to go home.
Yes.
Because what people
or to sleep.
Right. Yeah, because some people, they make it so complicated, and they have sub-brands and there's wheels within wheels. And that is really key. So funny enough, the Pillar white paper, I sat down and went through it. It took me about 2 or 3 hours to read. I had to look up all sorts of words I'd never come across, but I understood it. Mm-hmm. And it was a damn good white. It was actually called a grey paper. It was a really good one. So I would say that's really good. So red flags, for me, in my world, the red flag is if anyone comes to you and thinks that PR is going to do everything, right? Which it ain't.
Yeah, you get published, you get money.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, the truth, it's a tricky one. So basically, PR is part of the mix. You need to have a fantastic website. I'd say bad websites are not good, but the websites now, there are some fantastic websites. They look beautiful, and so websites, you have to have an amazing website. If the website isn't good, then you're stuffed. Mm-hmm. And you can forgive people a few language, people's English might not be their first language.
No, absolutely.
But, you know, that's perfectly acceptable. But I'd say that also I want to see the KYC on the site. I want to play around with it. And sometimes, you know, you get stuck in something and it's not quite working. Well, if that's 3 weeks before the ICO, you just send them a message and say, hey guys, this needs to go to glitch here. But you don't want to, you want that all ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. I think I am amazed at how much the whole scene has changed in the last year, quite frankly.
In the last 6 months, in the last 3 months.
Yeah, it's just so different.
Let's roll back a year ago. Google advertising, Facebook advertising, Twitter advertising, you know, everything was open. Now you roll, and airdrops were like cool because it was like a little advertising thing. Now you roll forward to just about a year later. There's no airdrops, as I've said many times in the past, to me are more like, what did I call it, Yuri?
Ooh, I forgot.
Freeloaders. Airdrops are for freeloaders because they're not going to invest and you're not really going to get anything out of them. They're not putting money in. Bounty programs before were like a real means for promoting marketing the project. Now they've just turned into something you have to show you've got lots of likes and tweets and retweets and links. You know, and sharing, but that doesn't really mean anything. But that's kind of like it's a means to an end. It's kind of sad, right? You don't really see that you can do any real advertising now, other than true media, which has become more important than ever. And a lot of people try to shortcut that now by doing sponsored ads. Where a year ago, why would you do that? You could get coverage. Now you have to work for the coverage. I mean, that's a huge difference. That's why what you do, Tina, for me is why I wanted to get you on here, was for people to realize the challenges and the difficulty of, you know, getting out there and getting your name out is harder now than it's been for ICOs. And, you know, professionals like you that have gone down the path of working with successful projects like Pillar are worth highlighting, so people realize that there is a real game with PR. Most of the ICOs I talk to think they can do it without PR and discover very quickly that without a budget for PR and without a budget for social influencers, then they're probably spending their money on stuff that's not going to actually generate awareness of the project that actually leads to all the things that your brain goes through that eventually leads 4 or 5 stages later to investment. So
completely,
right.
Completely
I mean, and just the amount of changing that's going on, that you now actually have to promote yourself on ICO Bench to be relevant, because you want to be on page 1, page 2, page 3 of ICO Bench, like being on page 2 or 3 of Google. That's become a requirement. And all the ICOs that don't do that, they may have a score of 4.5 and they're on page 7 because they didn't promote themselves. It's like, you know, it's the game has changed. And I'm sure if we catch up in 6 months' time, we're going to laugh at what I just said and say, what were you thinking? All of it was wrong.
No, it's so true. And I would say that if there's one thing you need to do on the marketing front, it is to engage with the YouTube influencers. That will have more impact than anything else. However, what's great is you can, if you have the conventional PR, so you've got good digital articles coming through, then that's the reassurance that people need, because they need to know.
Well, you could get an article written about how you were covered by a major YouTuber like ourselves, right, Yuri? We're in the majors now, or making our way in that space. Of course, you know. But on a serious note, though, I mean, you could probably get covered by 1 or 2 YouTubers or podcasters first, and then you get covered by Forbes or CNBC or Financial Times or whatever, and they actually make mention of the fact that some of the stuff that came out of those YouTube channels was interesting. Like, tell us about this thing you said with that person. Oh yeah, and then how that's evolving and changing, and like, oh, I wish I'd never said that 3 months ago, that kind of stuff, right? So you can create buzz by writing articles off the back of what I think people do on the YouTubes first, I would have imagined.
Yeah, although I'll tell you something really interesting.
Go on.
Is that I've written press releases about YouTubers supporting a campaign, and there is such an anti-Google sentiment in mainstream media, and even it's actually because of this anti-Google thing that's why in the UK at least, a lot of the Google media coverage is negative. Mm-hmm. and it's because it's partly, I think, it's partly because the media organisations know that they've lost so much revenue, know it's unregulated,
right?
Know that in particular, it's a fact there are a lot of there's a lot of material out there which is essentially illegal. And so there's a big story that broke in the UK about a year ago, which is actually very interesting. And it was when the big brands didn't know that they were actually, their ads were appearing in alongside content that was coming from supposed terrorists. Because of the way that and so there's a big and the media, the Sunday Times in the UK the Times newspaper actually did a fantastic expose and went to the brands and said, did you know that your ad is appearing here? And of course they didn't know, and then they withdrew their budget. And actually there's a massive thing with Unilever and Procter & Gamble, and they're looking at their whole marketing budget because they want to be in digital, but it goes back to this Turnio proposition, which is so clever. They want to be in digital, but they don't want to be in bad spaces. They don't want to be in the wrong places. They don't want to be supporting dodgy things. And
right.
who's policing it? It's unpoliced at the moment.
Right.
So there's a real opportunity to clean up. So all this is, it is, what you say is so true. And the one thing I'd say in support of bounty campaigns is a bit like the internet startup, when we had affiliate marketers who were going out and making a lot of money. So they were ordinary people who were entrepreneurial, sussing it out and doing well. I think a lot of these people who are running who are supporting the bounty projects, and we get to speak to some of these guys on Telegram, and they might be from the Philippines, they might be studying, and they're just smart, they're just getting into cryptos.
Absolutely.
And it really matters to them. And it really, really is a source of income for them. And their dream
Absolutely.
is to be, we'd love to be assisting on the Telegram chat. And you say, well, tell us a bit about yourself, and actually it's in-house, but tell us what you do. And well, I'm studying. And I think, great, that's fantastic. And that's the lovely thing. You get people from all over the world who, let's be honest, are getting some wealth. Mm-hmm. They're creating wealth virtually out of giving their time. And yeah, of course, some of it's spammy and some of it's over the top. But I say good luck, because I like that redistribution of wealth.
Yeah.
It's actually, to think that there are hundreds of these people who are going to be into cryptos who wouldn't otherwise be.
Absolutely.
Because they hang around Bitcoin talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tina, we're kind of reaching the end here. Are there any first off, you haven't told us how to reach you or your company. Do you want to share some details about that?
Right.
Thank you. That's very kind. So I'm on Twitter, and the handle is at Tina Fotherby. That's my name, at Tina Fotherby. So love to chat on Twitter. I am the only Tina Fotherby on LinkedIn. And I must share one little vision I've got to help spot scams. Wouldn't it be great if LinkedIn had date stamping against the information that people put on it?
Oh,
that would be a nice thing for
Well, they
Microsoft.
probably do in their database, but they're not exposing it publicly.
Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can backtrack. But anyway, that's just another story.
And what about your company, like your company URL?
Yeah, the company URL is famouspublicity.com.
Great.
And I'm delighted to say that I've got a new website coming soon. So
Super.
If you look at the current one and you say, that's interesting, I've got a better one coming. So yeah, I've been forced into that. So
sure.
Yeah, it's lovely to speak to you guys.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure having you here. Yuri, are there any final thoughts you've got on the world of crypto?
No, not on this one. Although I think I could ask Tina questions all day, so I'll just follow up with her later.
Oh,
well, we may bring you back for a follow-on episode. Of course, it'd be great to hear about after have had another big name like Pillar come along, that we could follow up on that, or even during it, how to hear the trials and tribulations of the battles you're facing with whatever's going on in media next. Because as you said, it's changing. It's a shifting landscape. It's like standing in quicksand and you don't know if it's going up or down.
Yes. Well, yeah, you're absolutely right.
I'm sorry. I got that wrong. It's called Bitsand.
Bitsand. But I'd say also it's a third world. Sorry, it's not a third world problem. It's a first world problem, like worrying about your crypto. That's what makes me laugh.
Right.
Absolutely.
If you've got it, then you're lucky. So that's my take on it.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, thank you both for once again participating. Thank you all the listeners for joining in again to another exciting episode of the Coin Chat. To the moon. Until next week.